Hello, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Were the RFU correct to sack Eddie Jones? I'm torn on the issue, but I'm going to get into it in this video. I think particularly I'm torn on it depending if your aim is to win the World Cup next year. But if you are new here, subscribe to the channel, like the video and drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think. I think this is actually a topic which is really splitting people's opinions, but let me know your view in the comments down below. All right, let's get into it. So as I mentioned, for many people, this is going to be a really straightforward yes. Of course, it was the correct decision to sack Eddie Jones. England have won 4 matches in their last 12. They were dismal in the autumn. They've been pretty poor realistically since the 2019 World Cup final. They've lost the faith of the fans. There was a lot of booing at Twickenham after the South Africa game. Eddie Jones didn't seem to be particularly bothered at all by the opinion of the fans, particularly in that autumn campaign. And it's a run of form which doesn't give confidence to what this England team are currently trying to do, building towards France next year. But as I said before in that intro, I'm torn on this, I think it depends on your outlook whether this was the correct decision or not. And I'm going to get into it in more detail. In my opinion, if your aim is to win the World Cup next year, at this moment in time, Eddie Jones would still have been the person to take them into that World Cup. If your aim is more to steadily build for the future, if you've lost complete faith in terms of where the squad is going, then of course it's the right decision to move on. But I do feel that England have less of a chance of winning the World Cup right now, as we stand today, where the RFU haven't got a replacement ready to go. They've now got to chat to Steve Borthwick and Leicester. I think they have a less of a chance of winning the World Cup today because of the current circumstances than they would have done with Eddie Jones. I'm going to get into it all in a bit more detail, so bear with me. And I have been really struggling with this because, as I say, on the one hand, it's such an easy slam dunk, yes, correct decision. But there's just that little thought in the back of my mind. When I think of where England are, when I think of where they're trying to go, was now the correct time to change the coach? And if you are going to change the coach, you need to have a succession plan in place. They clearly don't. I will get into all that in more detail. So first of all, I'm going to talk about it being the wrong decision. They haven't got a successor in place. Wales came out, made the decision, appointed Warren Gatland in the same breath that they were announcing that Wayne Pivac was going to move on. I think with 9 or 10 months to go into the World Cup, that's how you have to be operating. If the RFU were genuinely having these considerations of getting rid of Eddie Jones, they needed to have made contact with Leicester. Leicester have always said they wouldn't stand in Steve Borthwick's way, presuming he is the main guy and he's the one that's going to come in. They'd never stand in his way of him getting the England job. So you make that contact. You start having those discussions about compensation and also about the backroom team as well, because Leicester will let Steve Borthwick go, but they're going to need to be compensated. And also, if he's taking his backroom team with him, the likes of Kevin Sinfield, Richard Wigglesworth, whoever else might be there that he's going to want to take with him to England. Leicester are midway through a season. They might be happy to let those guys go, but not without the right compensation, not without reaching the correct agreement and making their own plans as well, because they're going to need to find replacements. So I think it's a bit of an oversight from the RFU to have not had more of a succession plan in place. That does really, that concerns me, I'll be honest with you. I also think Eddie Jones has got a proven record at World Cups, and you might easily dismiss this and saying, how can we look at England at the moment and talk about them winning a World Cup? I completely get that. But if we're talking about Eddie Jones, we're talking about a man who got Australia to the World Cup final in 2003, got England to the World Cup final in 2019, and was part of the coaching staff of South Africa in 2007 when they won the World Cup. I believe his World Cup win percentage is 90%. He is a coach who knows how to get it done at World Cups. And again, whether you like the approach or not, Eddie Jones was basically relying upon getting the England players in camp for 3 months before the World Cup, and that would be the time where he could mould them into a proper team. For a long time, he's complained about the access he gets to the players and the agreements with the Premiership clubs. So he was relying upon those 3 months before the World Cup for him to properly train those players and mould them into a squad. Now, I completely agree that I don't like that policy for the intervening years, because what he's basically done is he's disregarded the years in between 2019 and 2023. I completely with you all that is a terrible approach. He's basically said to the fans that the Six Nations and the Autumn Internationals and all the money people spend at Twickenham, none of it matters because it's about the World Cup. But the point is, we've basically got through that whole period now. So as much as I don't like that period, we've kind of got through it. If you were going to get rid of him, you'd have done it in the middle or perhaps at the end of the 2019 World Cup. But we are almost at the start of that World Cup. And given the fact that Steve Borthwick needs to be agreed his release from Leicester, he needs to get his coaches in. Eddie Jones has a proven track record at a World Cup. I think if your aim is to win the World Cup, Eddie Jones was our best chance of winning it, in my opinion. Could well be proven wrong. Steve Borthwick might come in and completely change it. They'll have a huge bounce, but that's just my gut instinct at the moment. It's also worth remembering what came before with Eddie Jones, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it was the wrong decision to get rid of him, but I think he's got a better win percentage, or he's won more games than Stuart Lancaster, Andy Robinson, everyone else that came before him, Martin Johnson, all those other coaches that came before him. He's got a better win percentage. And I think we will eventually look back at Eddie Jones as someone who did a huge amount for English rugby. But at the moment, maybe we're not there because I think he had lost the faith of the fans. But that's kind of my argument for why, if your aim is to win the World Cup in France next year, I think Eddie Jones at this moment in time gives us a better chance of doing that, because I think that 3-month camp before the World Cup would have been so key. Hopefully I've kind of explained that well enough. In terms of why it's the correct decision, and people, I think a lot of people will fall into this camp, it's the correct decision if you're so fed up with the regime, if you're so fed up with the awful run of form, that it's time to move on. It's time to start building again. That might not be for the World Cup next year. It might be for the years to come ahead of it. In terms of the longer term view, I think it does make sense. There was a story in the Times today as well where Max Malins was reduced to tears during the Six Nations. I think those England camps, and it's going to be fascinating to see what stories come out of them now that Eddie Jones has gone, really divides players. I think there are players that are fiercely loyal to him, who have played the best rugby of their careers under him, have been part of an England setup over multiple years, and he has always provided the most professional, the best environment, the best high performance environment. But it's also pretty cutthroat. It's pretty brutal. And I think stories like that one in the Times today will start to come out. There are also reports that the players had started to get tired of that whole routine, of that whole environment. It's been 7 years now for the guys that have been there from the very start, and even the guys who might have been there for 3 or 4 years. It's a really testing environment for them to be in. And I wonder whether the effectiveness of it had started to wear thin on the players, possibly. I guess we'll wait and see. We've also got the issue of selection, which many people have posted in the comments to my other video I've done with Eddie Jones on his muddled selection, sticking with Ben Young still at scrum half when there are many of us who would like to see Mitchell given a chance at Northampton, Van Portfleet and Rafi Quirk being the young guys coming in and really pushing for that place. He's stuck with Ben Youngs. He showed a loyalty to the Saracens contingent when Saracens got relegated to the Championship and they weren't playing as much, and then he ended up dropping those guys, and then the likes of Vunipola, Billy Vunipola and Mako have come back in the autumn and in the summer. There's been really muddled thinking in terms of selection, and some players that can barely get a look in despite being unbelievable in the Premiership, Ben Earl being one of those, who is such a dynamic back row option, and many people would like to see him given more of an opportunity. So the selection is another reason why you could say it was the correct decision. Then we've also got the game plan. Since 2019, the game plan from England has looked muddled, or certainly not that inspiring at best. A lot of kicking, trying to back the defence. Their attacking game, I think, has been virtually non-existent in this period of time. Their attacking game just hasn't flourished in the way that they have promised us, and it's kind of, they've always said, oh, we're building, we're getting there, it'll be okay at the World Cup, and everyone else just has to have this blind faith that it will be all right, without necessarily the evidence in the here and now that it is going to be okay. Then there's the issue of being fixated on the World Cup. Eddie Jones took Australia to the World Cup final in 2003. He then got fired before the next World Cup, and he always admitted that he got so fixated with correcting the wrong of 2003, of winning the World Cup in 2007. He his gaze got separated from maybe what was right in front of him, the winning here and now. And I do wonder whether he will reflect on his time with England and see that history has possibly repeated itself. Because I think after losing in 2019, he has been obsessed with winning the World Cup in France in 2023 to the detriment of performance and results in the years in between. Hopefully that's kind of rounded it up. I do appreciate that to a degree I've kind of contradicted myself because I've made both arguments for why he should or shouldn't be fired. For some reason, despite the form being bad of the players and the team not playing well for a few years, I still feel that Eddie Jones had a better chance of us winning the World Cup than getting a new person in right now, personally. But I can also see the argument that I agree, the form hasn't been that good. Hopefully, I'm hoping those two arguments kind of make sense, but I do appreciate that there is probably a bit of contradiction in there. But that's probably where I am with this whole situation regarding Eddie Jones. He is himself a contradiction. He's fiercely loyal to some players and shows no loyalty to others who come and go from England's squads. He can be incredibly entertaining, quite personable. He can also be quite rude and very spiky and difficult to deal with. So maybe the very fact that I am unsure over how to feel about this is a reflection of Eddie Jones himself. Anyway, maybe that's too much of a metaphor and I'm reading into it. But look, as I said at the beginning of the video, drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Was the RFU right to get rid of Eddie Jones? And what do you make of my kind of whole assessment of it? Please also subscribe to the channel. It makes such a huge difference. If you do feel like subscribing, I'd really appreciate it. And remember, I'll see you in the next one. Nice one.